All right, hello to those just joining in. We're just going to give it another 2 or 3 minutes here to let others find the link and join us, and then we'll get started very shortly. Great. Just one more time for those who just joined us. Just going to give it another minute or so, and then we'll get started officially, so others have a chance to join in the call here. So thanks for your patience. All right, so we got just over 30 people in the call here. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight and for registering and attending for tonight's JUMPinar. If this is your first time joining us, this is our Jumpstart Germantown JUMPinar series, which is a weekly webinar series hosted now on Wednesday nights. So if you're typically from the Monday night crew, welcome. It's just as weird for me to be on here on Wednesday nights after almost 2 years of doing them on Mondays. But same old procedure, and hopefully maybe we have some new folks in the audience who hadn't been able to make it on Monday due to a conflict or anything. I am going to just real quick stop the chat. If this is your first time, we handle all the communication to the panelists and everything through the Q&A, just to make sure the chat doesn't get too distracting. So throughout tonight's session, if you want to enter anything, just make sure to go through the Q&A. But anyway, back to my introduction. Tonight's JUMPinar, or through the JUMPinar series, we host several guests who cover topics in the real estate, industry and real estate development world that we don't typically have enough time to cover in our official training program, during the 4-week training program that we offer. So this is our opportunity to kind of dive deeper into specific subjects, and get a more wide variety of speakers on to share their expertise and knowledge with us. And tonight we're covering something that is extremely valuable to a jump starter, especially someone who is just stepping into bigger projects where they might be required to do more layout changes and multi-unit adjustments and everything. But basically, the topic we're talking tonight is designs and plans required for rehabs. And our guest is going to be a certified architect and a lot of other certifications that I don't know too much about, but he can likely share his expertise. But his name's Jesse Smith, and he was recommended to us through a jump starter, who thought this would be a good topic for everyone to get involved in. And I will introduce him in just a second, but real quick, I want to handle some housekeeping things. The first is, like I said, any questions for Jesse tonight throughout our conversation, be sure to enter them into the Q&A tab, which is found on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar there. And yeah, you'll be able to use the Q&A tab, just type in your questions, and we'll save all those until the end at around 7:45 when Jesse and I wrap up our conversation here. And yeah, just feel free to enter those in there as we go. And then the last little thing is I just want to give the Jumpstart plug. We are open to accepting loan applications now, and we are also accepting training program applications. We don't have our next training program scheduled, but it will more than likely be taking place in fall 2022, sometime mid-September to mid-October. So if you go ahead and apply now, you'll get on the wait list. And also, if you come across any deals that you want to submit as a loan application and have us review for financing, be sure to do that and check out our information And I'll type in the links to our websites in the chat here as we get going so everybody has them. But yeah, I think that's a good place to get started, and I'll go ahead and introduce our guest here tonight. Let me reorganize my screen. All right, 1 second. All righty. Sorry, I should have had this up. There we go. All right, well, welcome everybody. And tonight we're joined by Jesse Smith, and he is the owner and principal of JLS Architects, a full service architecture and design firm located in the greater Philadelphia area. Jesse and his team specializes in both residential and commercial construction and has completed over 150 projects each year. And Jesse is a member of both AIA and NCARB, and he is a registered architect in multiple states. And he's also a friend of Jumpstart and has helped out some Jumpstarters on projects. And we're happy to have him here tonight. So welcome, Jesse. And if you want to maybe expand on your introduction and say hi, you can go ahead and do that right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Derek. So pretty good introduction. So as Derek mentioned, I'm the founder and principal of JLS Architects. We kind of specialize in a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is full gut rehabs of either single family homes or multifamily conversions. And as Derek mentioned, we do about 100 plus of these projects per year. We do a lot of other multifamily work and other types of architecture, but we specialize in doing this sort of stuff and do about 100 of these projects each year, primarily through the greater Philadelphia area. And that's kind of the 2-second overview.
Yeah, that's great. So are you mainly just working on the architecture and designing side, or are you a developer yourself? Have you ever stepped foot into that role?
Not a developer myself. I have a lot of friends who are developers, and I see the headaches they go through, and I prefer to stay on the headache side of architecture and let them deal with the headache finances and unforeseen conditions.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's exactly what our program director, Angie, says. She's too risk averse for the development world, but more than happy to help on the other side, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Cool. Well, why don't we, start very basic, and for those who might have just seen the session topic and are like, I don't know too much about that. Let's dive in. Simple definition. What is a plan and what is a design or spec? As you might call it. What is it and what qualifies as one?
Sure. So plans are sometimes referred to as either blueprints or construction documents, and when you say spec, that's usually a written specification. It can be very formal in the term of a 3-part spec, which is something you can download from a manufacturer's website. And you could say, okay, I want to pick a new paint color, and here's the 20 pages that are associated with that paint color. For projects like we're talking about tonight, most specs don't really apply unless you're saying this might be the type of smoke detector you have to buy, or this might be the type of fire-rated door you have to get. So the specs are usually pretty basic. The plans are the construction documents that we put together that we give to the clients and say, this is what you're planning to build off of, and this is what you need to relay onto your contractor.
Mm-hmm. And then that's where their interaction with the project stops. Do they continue through the construction, or?
So who is that? The architect?
The person creating those designs. Yeah.
So it can happen in a couple different fashions. So in a lot of regards, for simpler projects, like a pretty straightforward rehab project, we'll prepare the drawings and specs, give that to our client and say, here you go, take this to the city, get your permits and start construction. And on most situations, that's the last we hear of them. Every once in a while, we get brought into projects and we do what's called construction observation or construction contract observation. Mm-hmm. And that's where we actually are going out to the site and they're saying, here's a condition we'd like you to take a look at in the field, or we didn't realize when we tore down this wall that there's a roof leader buried in here, and right, we don't know what to do. So we get brought out all the time to see those unforeseen conditions and help advise our clients workarounds for them.
Gotcha. So those designs and plans might need to change halfway through the project, considering what they find, halfway through demo, right?
They do. If you're purchasing something like a gutted out shell where you can walk in and it's a big square box, you take 2 measurements and you can start designing, you usually don't have those types of conditions. Right. But when you're going into a house where someone says, my big picture here is to gut everything in the house, take out every wall, take out every door, you're going to find some stuff buried in there that you didn't know was there. Whether it's chimneys or asbestos abatement or pipes that go all the way up to the roof. You never know what you're going to find.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a consistent theme amongst our Jumpstart or JUMPinar guests is people always say, you never, I think I froze there for a second, but you never can fully expect what's going to happen, but beyond the design phase, you can only prepare for the worst, right?
Prepare for the worst. Exactly correct.
Yeah, so it sounds like plans are what most non-real estate industry people would think of as blueprints, right? It's kind of just the paper version of what's eventually going to be constructed, in the building, right?
Absolutely. And for smaller projects, you might only have 1 or 2 pages of these drawings. And for larger, more complex projects, you can get up to 50, 60, or in the hundreds of drawing sheets.
Right. So now let's talk about, at least because a developer can't just, get out a big piece of drafting paper and start sketching and say, oh, that's my plan and move forward with that. So there needs
Sure.
to be some sort of, qualifications before those are made, right? So who's making these designs and plans and like how does the developer make that connection,
Yeah, so who makes the designs and plans? That usually comes from an architect or an engineer. There's certain things that an engineer will need to weigh in on if you're making structural changes and you say we have a staircase that we need to move, or we want to add an addition or a deck or something else. There's certain situations where you'll want to engage an engineer. But in most rehab projects like we're talking about, it's usually completely under the purview of an architect, where the architect goes out to the site. We typically like to either meet the client on site or get some sort of video walkthrough. We'll take our laser and our tape measure out, take our measurements so we know exactly what we're working with. And then we go back to our office and sit down at the drafting table and sketch out what we think might work. Usually that's in the form of a concept plan. We'll take that concept plan, give it back to the client and say, is this kind of what you had in mind? And it's an iterative process. There will be things they like, there's things they don't like, and you keep improving on it until you have a design that everyone's on board with.
hmm Yeah, and why don't we, clarify when we're saying with this scale of projects what we're talking about? Like where are we seeing the sorts of design like in a single family row home rehab? At what point, does the rehab become large enough or complex enough where designs and plans start to become required?
So they usually start becoming required anytime you're moving a wall inside the house is a good way to think about it. If you're if you're just doing minor work where you're trying to just add some new wall covering or paint some stuff or swap out a door or some countertops, you don't really need plans and specs for that. And we'll get into this a little later in the JUMPinar, but you probably don't need permits for most of those things too.
Okay.
When you're doing something where there's an inherent risk of danger, if you're changing egress paths, if you're changing door openings, if you're moving walls around and potentially structural items inside the house, that's where we want to get involved and offer our insight and say, here's things that you can do and here's things you can't do.
Yeah, and that's on the developer themselves to make the decision, whether to employ designs and plans, right? There's no like, there's no
No,
hard,
I
yeah,
mean, there are code requirements for them to provide those things, but and I'm sure
yeah,
some people on this call have run into situations where you try to do something without permits and L&I comes out and gives you a stop work order.
yeah, yeah. So this is a great segue into my next question here, and it's about permits, right? And
Sure,
what can you kind of like outline how permits and designs are related, and
sure,
why they kind of always exist together? So start, when are permits required, right?
sure. So permits are required, and I want to take a step back first, which is who's actually requiring the permits. And permits are required through whoever is the authority having jurisdiction. So in the industry, we typically call that the AHJ. So we say, who's the authority that has jurisdiction here? And in Philadelphia, that's always going to be Philadelphia License and Inspections, which everyone knows is L&I. So L&I adopts code books, L&I publishes reports, they set standards, and they say, here's the things that you need to provide in a plan. So most of that information is available online. Some of it's buried in code books that only architects and engineers have access to. And you go through that stuff and say, okay, here's the requirement for where I need smoke detectors, and here's the requirement for how wide hallways need to be. And all that information is then what gets conveyed onto the permit drawings. So to take a step back and answer the question a little more direct now, we say, well, when are permits required? Anytime you're doing demolition, anytime you're going for a zoning change or a variance, if you're changing the occupancy, and what some people don't realize is a change of occupancy might be taking a single family home and converting that into a triplex or a fourplex building. That's a change of occupancy. If you're changing the gross floor area, if there's an addition on the back and you're taking it off, or if you're building a new addition, in either case, you're changing the gross floor area and that requires permits. And then in general, any additions and alterations. We talked about moving doors and stairs and other things inside of the property. Those have to go and get plans and specs submitted to the city to get your permits.
Right. So you, uh, I think I cut out there. Am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Sorry about that. My question was going to be, in terms of, I actually lost my train of thought. You just want to continue on right ahead with when are permits required? You were answering, yeah.
Yeah, so permits are required whenever you're doing something that falls under the purview of L&I. So again, the demo, the zoning changes, all that kind of stuff. And they have set standards on there, and it's usually accessible through their website. They tell you when a permit is required. When in doubt, you can always call your local district office. So Philly has a couple district offices just because it's a larger city. You can go online, see which district office you have. You can call out an examiner and say, I'd like to know what permits might be required for this property.
Mhm.
They sometimes will come out and, more as a courtesy, say, well, what are you planning on doing? If you say, well, I'm going to take this garage in the basement, we want to get rid of it as a garage and make a bedroom down there. And they say, well, here's the types of permits that are probably required for your scope of work. So
Yeah.
the city's willing to work with you, but in most cases, your architect will have a pretty good sense of what's required for the project.
And does that examiner process, like you mentioned, does that come with a fee, or how, easy or hard is that to get done?
No, they don't charge a fee to come out. It's something where, and again, because they're not charging a fee, some
Yeah.
some districts can be a little more reluctant to come out and help you with the favor. But if you have a good rapport with them, if you're a developer who's done a few projects and plan to do more projects, it's certainly advisable to be on their good side, know who the examiners and the inspectors are, and if you're on their good side, they'll throw you a bone when you need it.
Right. Yeah. So, and I remember what my question from a minute ago was, basically, people should be aware of the not only the permits but the designs and plans that they're going to need in the very initial stages of planning their project, right? Like in
Right.
their initial analysis of the project and seeing what construction or what rehab is going to be needed. They should have the resources to kind of identify that as early as possible, right? You don't want to wait until you're closed on the property and you realize, oh, there's 10 outstanding permits that I'm going to need to figure out, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So we like to be engaged as early as possible. We do a lot of projects where someone comes to us and says, look, I plan on purchasing this house. I don't know much about it. I want to have you walk through it. Tell me what's possible. We'll do a walkthrough and say, maybe you want to just pass on the property completely, or maybe you can turn it into a 3-unit triplex building.
Right.
And in certain situations, we'll do the plans and specs and have everything ready to go. So the day they close on the property is the day they can submit for permits, and they don't have to. There's no real carrying cost between their acquisition date and the day that they get permits.
Right. But and you're saying it really can be kind of a make or break on a deal if you're looking at it and thinking, oh, these 5 extra permits that I'm going to need might not make it worth, this extensive budget, or I might not be able to sell it for high enough. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and generally, so the permits in Philadelphia are pretty straightforward costs. There's other cities that you start doing work in where they charge the permit fee based on a percentage of the work. So they'll say 1% of your construction cost is going to be the permit fee. Philly doesn't do that because everyone would just not be truthful and say their project's worth $10,000 and pay a permit fee and move on. So Philly has a set guideline that says for a plumbing permit, we charge you, I think it's like $25 a toilet and $10 for every kitchen sink. And that's what your plumbing permit costs. And for a residential building permit, if it's single family, it's this flat fee. If it's 2-family, it's this flat fee,
Gotcha.
and so on. So it's good to know what the budget is ahead of time as you're putting your performance together and saying, does this property make sense for me to buy and rehab?
Mhm.
It's very different if you're planning to purchase a property and just go in and put on a fresh coat of paint versus if you're planning to gut all the walls, add an addition on the back, and go in for a zoning variance.
Mhm. Okay, great. So now moving on, once you determine the need that you are going to need permits, or you are going to need to employ designing and planning into this project, um, how do you go about choosing an architect, or a professional, an engineer, to work on this project with you? Is it like similar to a contractor selection, or how is the dynamic between a developer and an architect?
Sure. So there's, as a general rule, there's a few sources you can use to get an architect. So the one that works probably the best is the word of mouth. Everybody knows another developer who's done what they're trying to do. You call them up and say, who did you use and did you have a good experience with them? If they say, here's who I used, but I didn't like them, probably not worth you giving them a call. If they said, this is who I used before and they were great, then it's probably a right fit for your project. So word of mouth goes really far. And once you find that person or a couple people, we always recommend interviewing them. So give them a phone call and say, is this the kind of project that you are equipped to handle? And they might say, look, we do a lot of single family, but we've never done a 10-unit conversion project. That's something that's not in our wheelhouse. So you interview them, you find out first if they're licensed in the jurisdiction. If you're talking to someone who's done projects in Philly before, likely they're licensed in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. Are they familiar with the local codes? So Philadelphia is a little unique, and I know this conversation is kind of Philly specific, but I'll broaden it for a minute here. And Philadelphia has adopted their own codes as a first-class city, which are some of the more stringent codes in the entire state of Pennsylvania, and actually supersedes some of the other state codes. So if you have an architect who says, yeah, I've done this a million times out in Pittsburgh or Erie or Allentown, they might not be familiar with the codes of Philadelphia, especially the zoning codes. So asking that architect and saying, is this something you're familiar with, and getting a sense of what they've done before. And then the other critical items that I would ask if I was the developer is, what is the schedule for deliverables? You might find an architect and they say, yeah, we're the right fit and we've done this project a million times. And you say, okay, well, how long will it take you to give me plans and specs? And they might say, we can have it next week, or they might say, we can have it in about 3 to 4 months for a little backlog. And that alone might make a determination for you if you say, well, we just can't wait 3 months. The carrying costs or the finance costs or whatever it is doesn't make sense for us on this project. And then lastly, as another item of how do you decide on the architect or not, similar to how you would select a contractor, we'd always recommend getting a written proposal from the architect. A lot of people will on the phone give you a number and say, yeah, we'll charge you 2,000 for this scope or 10,000 for this. And that's fine, but that written contract is what you really need to be able to go back on and say, this is what you owe me, and this is the timing you gave me to do it.
Sure. Gotcha. And this seems like an appropriate place to kind of give you some time to talk about your own business, and maybe you can put your process for people getting involved in your architecture firm. How would a jump starter reach out to you or get involved and get you helping on their projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've worked with a couple, I don't know if the graduates is the right term or not, but we've worked with a couple of graduates of the Jumpstart program. And we're working on those projects kind of on a recurring basis. We've probably done 20 or so projects through Jumpstart, and again, plenty of others through traditional development means. Normally we get, and the word of mouth is great, but we also get a lot of feedback, whether it's through our website. So jlsarchitects.com, we have a contact page there. People will reach out to us and give us a little insight and say, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm looking to purchase this, or I already own this, or what are your thoughts on doing this kind of project? And that's just a good avenue for us to get involved early on in the project, help out. And in most cases, it's the right project for us. Every once in a while, we'll say it might not be a project that's up our alley, and we'll recommend another architect who might be better suited for it. But for what we're talking about tonight, the rehabs and conversions, that's something we do quite a bit of in the Philly area.
Awesome. Well, and I'll be sure to get your contact information so that we can, or wherever you want to direct people, if they come across a potential project that needs an architect, so we can, get them headed your way, because you're familiar with the Jumpstart model anyway, right?
Absolutely. And our team would be happy to provide those services to anyone on this call.
Great. Awesome. And okay, moving on to my next question here, and I want to speed up a little bit because we are getting plenty of listener questions here.
Okay.
I want to make sure we get through. But the next thing I want to ask you about is sort of specific aspects of a single family home rehab, let's say, or a single family or maybe a duplex, where you're going to see professional plans being required, right? Like, I understood, or you said a couple scenarios, like whether it's, moving under load bearing walls, or whether it's, determines the safety or around certain types of fixtures and stuff. But like in a typical, rehab of a single family home, right? What are maybe your top 5 most common permits that you're seeing? It doesn't have to be 5, but something like,
yeah, the most common one is just an alteration building permit. So it's when you're going on the Eclipse system, which I don't know if we talked about that yet, but when you go on the Eclipse system, it's just labeled as a residential building permit. And that handles single family and 2 family units, so duplexes. Anything that's larger than that, triplexes and on up, it's a different type of permit that you have to fill out. Okay. And the things that we like to get a good sense of right away is, how many units are you trying to get in the building? Again, are you trying to keep it single family, or are you trying to convert it to a duplex and maybe you need a zoning variance? Yeah. And then what's the pro forma? Are you looking for the maximum number of bedrooms and bathrooms? Are you looking for something like a co-living model? Are you looking for something where this is a more luxury brand and you're okay taking a 1,400 square foot house and putting 2 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms in it? everybody has their own idea of what they want the house to be, and we kind of listen to our clients and work with them to give them those plans.
Okay, gotcha. So it sounds like it's mostly just people who are doing multi-unit conversions, right, and seeking to get more investment out of or more rental amounts out of a property that could fit more units. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the case in a lot of instances. But again, the single family kind of traditional thing where someone says, I just want to gut the house. Maybe I want to move the stairs, or maybe I want to keep them as is. That's important for us to know because that's something that's usually baked into your budget. If you're saying, well, I'm going to do structural work, you better have a structural number as part of your performa.
Right.
And if you don't, if you say we're going to keep the structure where it is, we're just gutting everything that's non-structural, that's helpful for us to know, and we can design around those parameters.
Gotcha. Okay. And now maybe we can move in and talk a little bit more specifically about multi-unit conversions, because that's
Sure.
a lot of things that developers consider when they're scaling up, want to
Sure.
increase the amount of cash flow that they're having, and rent instead of sell, and do, rentals instead of flips. Um, so what specifically, in a multi-unit conversion, taking a single family, larger home and splitting it into 2 or 3 units, what does planning look like then? I'm sure that imagines a lot of designing around, like the safety, I guess, right? Because there's more people living in a solitary.
Absolutely. So you're talking about egress and health, safety, and
Right,
welfare, life safety codes.
right.
It's a totally different set of code books. It's a totally different set of requirements.
Mhm.
We like to help out with the due diligence on the front end because just because you find a single family home that's massive, there's a lot of these brownstone homes in Philadelphia that are 3 or 4 thousand square feet. And a developer looks at that and says, this is perfect for a duplex.
Mhm.
And it comes down to zoning. What's the zoning on the property? If it's zoned RSA 3 or RSA 5, that's a big uphill battle to go and try to get a duplex permitted in that building. If it's something like RM1 or CMX2 or 3 or 4, it's a much easier time because those things are allowed by right, and it's an easier permit process.
Mhm. Yeah. So, and the zoning conversation is a whole separate
That's a
discussion, I guess.
separate,
Right,
exactly.
right. But let's assume that the there is they have the zoning by right, and
Sure.
they're RM1 unit, and they want to make this into 2 units. Um, in terms of the egress, you're saying, like, I know a lot of things, or something that people consider a lot of the time is adding a basement unit, right? And
Right.
and in that situation, you're going to need to put the egress and have this whole extra set of designs around that, right? Because that might be under a structural wall or something, or.
Yeah, so the basement units are a question we get asked all the time. The basement's plenty big enough. Why don't we just pop a unit down there? And quite honestly, they usually don't work out. It's very expensive to do a basement unit because you got to keep in mind the house was never traditionally designed to have someone living down there.
Mhm.
So in addition to putting something like an egress door or an egress window, L&I looks at it a little differently and requires some other documentation. Sometimes it's even a change of use because it might be permitted by L&I as a storage use, and now you're trying to make it residential.
Right.
And you talk about things like plumbing. If you've been in a Philly row home, usually the plumbing is exiting not under the slab, it's kind of halfway up on the wall.
Mhm.
Well, water only flows downhill. So that means if you're doing a bathroom down there as well, you got to pump it up. You got to use a sewage ejector pump. And it
Mhm.
starts adding a lot of costs that you don't think about when someone walks into a basement, looks around and says, yeah, I could fit a bedroom and a bathroom down here.
Right. Yeah, and all those things like plumbing, routing, and electrical, that's all going to need planning, because it's not for just one single family home. It's
Yeah,
for
and
multiple.
and actually that brings up an interesting point. So there's also permits that the city of Philadelphia offers. They're called EZ permits, and that's what they're intended for is easy work.
Mhm.
So in certain townships, the architect will be responsible for showing all the circuiting of the lights, for showing the panel schedule and saying, here's how we're going to balance the electric panel,
Mhm.
showing plumbing drawings. Philadelphia is a little unique that, quite honestly, they don't want to review that stuff. It's not worth their time. So they allow you to get a permit and say, if you're a licensed plumber, if you're a licensed master plumber, just fill out this piece of paper and we'll give you your permit.
Okay.
As long as you like promise you're doing the work, we're good. Same thing with an electrician, and same thing with an HVAC guy. They say, if you're the contractor, just sign off on this stuff and we don't need formal drawings.
Okay. Great. Yeah, and I think I saw one of our listener questions ask about easy permits, so we'll touch on that in a few minutes here.
Perfect.
Um, but okay, and then just before we move on from multi-unit conversions, yeah, is there any other tips you have for increasing, living space, or decreasing living space, and increasing the amount of tenants? anything
Yes.
like that, as you have for people?
So with conversions, we see a lot of oversight happen with easement access. So most properties, if you read the deed, there's typically an easement at the back. They're called like the Philadelphia alleyways. It's a 3 or 4 foot wide easement. And those are actually really critical. People don't realize this because if you're egressing out the back of the building, and let's say the house is on fire, if you're egressing out the back of the building and there's not an easement there, you would just be trapped in your own backyard as your house burns down.
Mhm.
With that easement, it allows you to basically take that alleyway back out to what they call a public right of way, which is some sort of public street, and that brings you back to safety. Every once in a while, there's pockets of neighborhoods in Philadelphia that don't have that rear easement, and it makes doing a conversion very difficult. So
Hmm.
we always say that if you're going to look at doing a multi-unit conversion in a single family home, always check first and make sure that your egress is taken care of, or you might be limited to single family.
Mm. Yeah, Jesse, you have me thinking now. I'm thinking about in my backyard. I'm like, if I was stuck out there, I don't know if I have that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most people have just built fences on the property and they
Mhm.
build it right to the center of the easement, which you're not allowed to do, but everyone does it.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah.
it's as long as you have a legal entitlement that gives you the right to use it, you're
Mm.
in the clear.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Well, then moving on, I guess we'll wrap up our talk on permits here. And
Mhm.
who you mentioned the Eclipse system, and we've had a couple JUMPinars, with people trying to break that because that's another whole discussion, right? Is how to
Sure.
get your permit submitted. But who's using Eclipse system, and who can apply for this permit?
Sure. So in a nutshell, almost anyone can sign up for the Eclipse system, but there's only certain people that can pull a permit. So anybody on this call could submit a permit. When you go to submit a permit through Eclipse, they're always going to ask you who the contractor is. They want to make sure that a licensed contractor is doing the work.
Mhm.
You don't need to have that information when you submit the permit, but they won't give you the permit in your hand until that information is completed.
Mhm.
So that's helpful if you are bidding out a couple contractors and you say, I have it down between A, B, and C. We're not sure who we're going to choose yet. You can still submit the permit. You can start that process. Just before they give you a permit, they're going to ask for the contractor's information.
Mhm.
Uh, Typically, the permit is submitted again by us, the design professional. It's something that we offer. Most people just find it easier to submit it themselves. It can also be submitted by your attorney. It can be submitted by your contractor, or it can be submitted by a licensed expediter. My recommendation is to always have your contractor submit it because at the end of the day, they're the one who has to go into Eclipse and be the one to click on when they need their next inspection scheduled. And they have to go online and say what the status of the project is. So the contractor is a critical part of the Eclipse system. We always like to push it to them and say, make sure it's in their contract that they're responsible for submitting and paying for permits.
Right. And then the contractor is going to be the one working with the architect and the engineer and everybody to kind of aggregate all the information so that they're getting what's needed, right?
Sometimes in a lot of cases, we don't get involved with the contractor. When we have the finalized plans and specs, we give that to our client.
Mhm.
And again, that might be the end of our conversation with them. That's the end of our services.
Right.
Um, they then turn around and hand that piece of paper or those drawings to their contractor and say, this is what you're going to build, and this is what we need you to submit.
Right. Okay. Great. That clears up kind of I guess, the order at which things need to happen for it to get done.
Sure.
Great. And then my last question here is about other information that might come with the permit. What I'm sure plans is a significant piece. That piece of paper that the architect's giving you to either what do you upload it to the Eclipse system
Yeah.
or
So it's electronically signed PDF documents, and that's what gets uploaded to Eclipse.
Gotcha. So say you've gotten that and you've got your contractor's license or the all the appropriate license numbers and
Mhm.
everything. What other information could they be asking? Is there any like narrative descriptions you need to give or any subjective information?
There's a brief narrative that as you go and start filling out the permit, there's a couple of general questions that Elle and I will ask. So they say, how many units are you doing? Is it single family, two family, or more? And if you check the more box, it's a separate permit pops up.
Mhm.
So they want to know how many units. They want to know if the building's sprinklered. They want to know the approximate square footage. They want to know how many stories. It's for the most part, it's all the things that you should know about your own project.
Mhm.
It's very rare that we get a call and someone says, hey, how many square feet is this property actually? What we do for our clients is right on our main cover sheet, we'll list out pretty much all of that information.
Mhm.
So when they call us up and say, hey, I'm about to submit for permits, we say, great, just make sure you have our cover sheet in your hand because they're going to ask you a lot of questions and this is your open book test.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I think this is a good time. We can move on to listener questions because I got through my
Sure.
list. But yeah, Jesse, thank you so much for that overview. I definitely,
Absolutely.
yeah, I definitely learned a lot, and this is we've started to dig a little bit more deeper and get people to prepare their designing and planning more before submitting a loan application. Because usually they submit the loan application and then we're like, hey, do you have this, this, and this? And they're like, I didn't even think I needed that. So
Sure.
so hopefully this gives people kind of some pretext to what they're going to need to even submit a loan application. So thanks so much for your time here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we'll move over to the audience Q&A and move through these. At our best pace, we'll plan on wrapping up around 8. But the first question here comes from Darnetta, and she's wondering, do you do plans for small projects? Example, someone rehabbing a single family home and they're required to go to the zoning board of adjustment for the approval of a project. So I know we kind of discussed this, but what's your experience in smaller projects like that one?
Yeah, so of course, yeah, we do smaller projects. A lot of architects do smaller projects. Um, there's no minimum size that we'll handle on a project, but with that caveat, it's sometimes our fees aren't competitive when we get down to that really small size. We've done projects where someone says, I need your help designing a custom kitchen. We'll do a custom kitchen, but it's not $100 fee for us. And I think the second part of that question was about going to the zoning board of adjustments for the approval. So this is a funky topic. So the zoning board of adjustments, the ZBA, there's no guarantee as to whether or not they'll approve it or not. And so if your property, and we can talk, there's a whole separate zoning conversation about zoning board and ZBA and all the other stuff, but in general, yes, architects go and we meet with the ZBA or Board of Building Standards if needed and help get your project approved. The caveat is there's no guarantee that we can get it approved. Sometimes the ZBA just tells you no, even if you have all the right reasons. And that can be a challenge because you think you have everything in line. You say, look, my zoning attorney says it's a shoe-in, everything's going well on this project. And for whatever reason, ZBA says we're just not feeling it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's unfortunate, but that's how the city works, right?
That's how it works.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Darnetta. And our next question is about architect fees for designs. So, maybe you can give people what the industry average is, you think, for certain designs or plans, but I'm sure a lot of it is subjective, right? Based on
it's incredibly subjective and it's incredibly project specific. There's a big difference between what we like to call the permit drawings, which is where someone says, I have a contractor on board. All I need is to get permits. I'm going to go to Home Depot and pick out all the finishes myself. Versus someone who says, look, I'm an out-of-state investor. I'm never even going to set foot in this property. And I need you guys to put together full construction documents. Show me every light switch. Show me every paint color. I need all that stuff taken care of, and you guys have to provide that. The only real ballpark number I can give is it's usually as a percentage of the contract value. So that can be anywhere down, and this is on larger projects. We're talking something like 4 units and up. You might have an architect fee that's 2% of the construction budget. And when you get down into smaller things and more complex, you might have an architect fee that's 10 or 12% of the construction budget. It really just depends on the architect you're going with and the type of scope you're asking them to provide.
Okay, gotcha. And our next question here comes from Joanna, and she was wondering, well, a couple questions. How, what, and who do I need to see who can give me an inspection for a wall for structural integrity? Can a general contractor make that call or an engineer only?
It happens all the time where someone lets their general contractor make that call, and we definitely advise against that. Ever since the Salvation Army collapse in Philadelphia a couple of years back, L&I has really cracked down on any demolition scope. You now need to be an approved demolition contractor. Mm-hmm. And there's a separate permit you can get called a non-load bearing interior demolition permit. Mm-hmm. If we're talking a traditional row house, that might be 14 to 18 feet wide. In most cases, the joists are running from party wall to party wall, so from your neighbor's house to your neighbor's house, and there's typically no bearing walls in the middle of the plan. Larger properties, detached single families, you start getting into situations where now there's interior bearing walls, and that's a bit tricky. So as a general precaution, we always advise to have a structural engineer come out, and they'll be able to pretty quickly tell you if it's bearing or not.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if there's even any, hint of a question about it.
If there's a hint of a question, call them out. Sometimes that can be done just through a visual observation, where if they can pop their head above a ceiling tile, or there's a hole in the wall where they can pop their head in and see and say, yeah, this looks like it's structural framing. There might be some bracing that hints otherwise.
Mhm.
And in a lot of cases, we can walk into a structure and just say, no, we've seen this enough times to know it's not load bearing.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Next question here comes from Raymond, and he was wondering, in your experience, how long on average does it take to get plans and permits approved? So I'm sure this answer has changed drastically over the past 3 years. But
It
what's the,
has. So Philadelphia publishes a manual that says how long they take to get permits, and I, take it with a grain of salt. But I'll tell you what the city of Philadelphia says that they do. So from the day that you go into Eclipse, you have all the information provided, and you pay them their fee, and you press the submit button on your computer. They are allowed to have 20 days, 20 business days to get back to you with some sort of comments.
okay.
Easy projects, they'll look at it and the comment will be, here you go. You have your permit ready, come pick it up. And other times they'll say, we have a question as to why this door swings this way, or where's the smoke detector here? And we think you might have missed something. And then it goes back to your architect or your engineer. You have to provide a written clarification, and then they get another 20 days to review and approve it. So for simple rehab projects like we're talking about tonight, we like to tell people that the city of Philadelphia tells you they'll have 20 business days. We like to tell everyone 30. They don't really run on schedule. With that being said, they do offer something called an accelerated permit fee. For smaller projects, it might not make financial sense, but generally it's about a $2,000 cost, where you pay that as part of the permit fee. And L&I then guarantees that they will have permit comments or a permit, whichever is up next for them, within 5 business days. So it's one way to accelerate it, but it comes at a price of $2,000.
All right, and I've heard, and I think we've even had a JUMPinar discussing this, but is expediting or hiring an expediter a strategy that could help?
Yeah, so the role of an expediter has changed over the years. Traditionally, expediters would be the person who went to L&I down at the municipal services building, stand in line, hold their little deli ticket in their hand, and when someone said, okay, we're ready for number 101, they'd walk up, unroll the plans, and explain exactly what they're doing.
Right.
That was the traditional role of an expediter. That has changed quite a bit in the Eclipse system, where now anybody can just press submit on a computer.
Mhm.
Expediters are helpful and again, they charge a fee, so it might not make sense on certain projects, but they're helpful because they're the first line of defense on this type of project. So when a question comes up and they say, we don't understand why this door swings this way, or we don't understand how you're going for a change of use, the expediter has the experience and knowledge to speak kind of on our behalf as the architect, and say, I know why they're trying to do this. And all it does is speed up the process a little bit. For a lot of projects, we're seeing less and less of them just because the nature of their industry has changed, but we do have clients that still use them.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah, and probably since the last time we've had the guest on to speak about expediting, things have changed, with Eclipse and everything. So,
Sure.
okay, our next question here, and we're moving right along. We should be able to get through the rest of these in the next 10 minutes or so. But the next question is from Jay, and he was wondering, are permits required for adding an additional bathroom? So this is probably very common, in homes, either it be a half bath or a full bath. What are the permits that come with that?
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of something where an easy permit makes sense. If you are the owner of the property, and when I say you, I mean it's your name on the deed. It's not an LLC you've created. It's not a joint venture or anything like that. If it's you on the property and there's certain criteria that you can meet, I believe the threshold is now $25,000 or less. So if you say, I'm just putting in a half bath or whatever it is, it's going to cost less than $25,000. I might do the work myself and yada, yada, yada. It's still a permit, but it's a much easier permit because they don't usually require the plans and specs.
Mhm.
As soon as you say, well, it's owned by an LLC or some company, plans and specs, and it's not your primary residence. I also should have mentioned that if it's your personal house,
Yeah.
then you can do it. But if it's a investment property, or this is your second, third, or fourth house, we'll put together a pretty simple drawing that says, here's what the bathroom layout's going to be. That's the 1-page permit drawing you submit through the Eclipse system, and you get a easy plumbing permit.
Gotcha. Okay, great. I am learning so much. I wish we could just have an hour session just to ask you questions like this. But anyway, us move on. Maria was wondering, what is the difference between easy permit and a regular permit? You kind of covered that already. Basically, easy permits are things that you aren't going to be required designs or plans for that you're doing. You said in a home where you own it without an LLC in your individual name, right?
Yeah, and so you can also get an easy permit for an investment property, a rehab that you're trying to flip.
Mhm.
Um, there's just certain criteria, and again, like
Okay.
talk to your architect about that. They'll be able to tell you which ones are applicable on the project.
Gotcha.
In most cases, for what we're talking about tonight, you should be able to get an easy permit for the mechanical and for the plumbing work.
Even if you own it in an LLC, you're saying.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Next question here comes from Nelson. He was wondering, do you need permits for drywall and to install flooring?
Drywall is an interesting one, and I'm not sure if this question is geared towards a house that is just kind of stud framed and no one ever put drywall in it. Traditionally, yes, you'll want to go and get permits, and even though they may not be required if it falls under a certain scope and certain purview, this is one of those items where if you don't have permits for it and the local inspector comes out and sees you carrying drywall in and here's the nail guns firing, they're going to come into the house and say, it looks like you're working without a permit, and shut you down.
Mhm.
This is the perfect example of calling up your local district office and say, hey, I have a piece of drywall I need to patch, or I have an entire house that was stud framed and never had the drywall put on. Is this something I need a permit for? And depending on which neighborhood you're in, they might just tell you to go ahead with it, or they might say, yes, you need a permit. The second part of that question, install flooring. No, if you're just installing flooring, if you're ripping out something, you're ripping out tile and you're putting in LVT or VCT or carpet or whatever, traditionally, no, you don't need a permit.
Mhm.
The one exception to that is when you start talking about multi-family buildings, if you're putting new flooring inside an egress path, so inside a common corridor like a triplex, that technically needs permits because they want to make sure you're not putting something like carpet that's flammable inside an egress corridor.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. The next question here comes from Jihad, and he was wondering, please explain, or if you could please explain these following concepts. First is lot size, and then open area and use and density in Philadelphia. I'm not sure about that last one. Maybe you know what he's talking about.
I think I have an idea of what Jihad's talking about here. So when you're doing a multifamily conversion, depending on which zoning district you're in, it's a calculation you use that tells you how many units you're allowed in the building. So I'll use RM1 for instance. So in RM1, if you have a lot size that's 1,500 square feet, a 1,500 square foot lot means that you can put 4 units in the building. Now, that doesn't mean the building can fit 4 units. That just means that by right, legally, you are allowed to put 4 units in.
Right.
The house might be so small that it only makes sense as a single family or a duplex. Um, and that, I think that's what he's asking about with lot size. Open area, same thing. It depends on the zoning district. Usually in a lot of these districts, it's 25% open area if you're an interior lot, which means you have a property on either side. And if you're a corner lot, in a lot of these districts, that goes down to, or it goes up, I should say, to an 80% coverage that you can build on. Usually only applies if you're doing something like an addition to the property.
Mhm.
And then I think density, use and density, those are also factored in from zoning tables, which is a different zoning discussion. Depending on what district you're in, there's a table you follow that says, could I put a veterinary clinic in this single family home? And you follow down the table and it says, no, the single family home only allows single family uses.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Next question here. Your recommendation into living quarters. I don't think there's a lot of garages in Philadelphia, but maybe in the suburbs. What's the strategy for changing that into living quarters?
Yeah, so you cut out, so I'll reiterate the question, which is what are the recommendations for converting a single family, a single garage to living quarters? There's actually a lot of this in Philly, especially up in the North Philadelphia area, like around the Olney kind of neighborhood. Less so in Germantown, but there's neighborhoods and pockets of neighborhoods that have this, where there's an easement behind the property that's a driveway or an alleyway, and everyone's garage faces that. Um, Converting it into living quarters, it's kind of twofold. There's a zoning change because it's currently classified as a storage use for vehicles. So you go in, you have to get a zoning permit to change this, and then you submit a separate permit for the building permit, which is saying here's where we want to put the bathroom, the kitchen, whatever else you're putting down in the basement.
Got it. I'm just typing some answers in chat here as we
Sure.
go. All right, and the next question here comes from Mark, and he was wondering, what about obtaining a permit in the name of one contractor and then changing the contractor? So you mentioned how in Eclipse, maybe if you have like three competing bids and you're not sure which one you're going to go with, you can put all
Sure.
three. What about if there's a total switch in them?
Sometimes there's total switches where you think you're going to hire the right contractor and you just, for whatever reason, can't get the deal done. The guy originally told you he would take 3 months and now he's telling you it's 9 months and now he's not the right fit. The process to do that, there's a JOT form through the City of Philadelphia's website where you can go in and you can request a change of contractor. I believe the new contractor has to provide on his letterhead something that says that he's going to be the new contractor, and then you as the building owner have to put something on your letterhead that says, I authorize this change. But it's a pretty straightforward process. It just takes a couple days.
Gotcha, makes sense. Next one comes from Brianna, and she was wondering, if I add units to a single family home, what other internal changes will I have to make? So, yeah, it sounds like you know what. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is asking about taking a single family home and converting it into something like a duplex or triplex. So again, happens all the time. Everyone's heard the term like, oh, that's grandfathered in. And that term doesn't apply when you're undergoing a change of use. So a change of use in this case is now taking a single family, which is zoned R, which is in the building code classified as an R3 use, and you're converting it to multifamily, which is R2 use. And when you make that shift, the whole grandfather argument kind of goes out the window, and it's almost as if you're providing a new property. Okay. So I like to tell clients who are talking about doing this for the first time, I basically tell them, you're essentially building a new building inside of your building. So it's not like the costs are going to be super low. You're building a new building.
Right.
Now that you're jacking up the number of uses, you need to provide sprinklers, you need to provide a fire alarm, you need to have rated floors between units, you need to have rated walls between units. It gets a little more expensive.
Yeah, that's our next question coming up here is
okay.
how much of a renovation triggers the need to add a sprinkler system. So at what point, does it become more of a commercial property where, you're not commercial by zoning, but, like more of a.
Sure.
Yeah. What triggers that? Yeah.
So as soon as you take a single family use, and this is an existing single family use, because I think people on this call might know that if it's ground up new single family in the city of Philadelphia, it needs sprinklers now. That's their requirement from a few years back. But if you're taking something that's a single family and you're putting that and trying to go for a duplex or triplex, that definitely triggers the requirement for a sprinkler system. There's only a few caveats, but they probably don't apply to most projects that we're talking about here. Gotcha. The other time that question comes up is when there's a lot of floor joists that are damaged and someone comes in and says, well, we don't want to repocket the floor joists. We want to take out all the floor joists, make them nice and level, and put in new 2x10s. That's fine. You can do it. That is, there's a threshold that the city of Philadelphia sort of uses. And I say that loosely because their threshold is if you're touching more than a third of it, there's a third of any one floor. They're supposed to make it considered new construction, which therefore requires sprinklers. With that said, there are certain locations in Philadelphia where we've seen people do the entire floor, totally gutted out. We kept telling them, there's a good chance that L&I might tell you need sprinklers, and it just never came up. Okay. So it's very much a district by district question.
Gotcha. Okay. And I had a follow-up question for that. And commercial, I think I cut out and froze again. Am I back?
You're back.
All right. Jesse, I told you it would happen. I said it would happen one time for every hour. Now it's happened, it doesn't. But basically, my question was for properties that are zoned commercial mixed use, correct me if I'm wrong, they will always need sprinklers, period, right? Or no?
99% of the time, yeah. Again, there's weird exceptions, but yeah, you'll always need sprinklers.
Okay, gotcha. All right, the next question here comes from Samantha, and she was wondering, does your firm design plans for row homes with sustainable, green, environmental friendly elements?
Yeah, of course. So we've done, and there's plans that we design and then they get priced out. And usually when they're getting priced out, people find out the true cost of doing green or greenwashing or sustainability. And on investment properties, unfortunately, it doesn't often make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, we've done it. We've looked at everything from well buildings to green globes to blanking on some of the other ones here, to lead homes to passive house. And there's just different scales for how much that stuff costs. And the level of work that goes into it is higher than a traditional renovation.
Yeah, sure. We had a JUMPinar on solar panels a few weeks ago. Are there specific permits and designs required for for the installation of solar panels on the roof or anything?
There are, I forget the name of the permit for it. It used to be a very complex permit, and then people complained to the city that all they want to do is put solar panels on their roof, and it's overly complicated and cumbersome. So the city's changed it quite a bit. Um, Usually it's taken care of directly through the solar panel installation company, because for the permit, they'll say how many kilowatts, what's the size, and everyone looks at us and we go, I don't know what kind of size you're going to buy. That's a question for the person who's selling you the panels.
Right. Gotcha. Okay, cool. And we're gonna wrap up here with two questions. Apologies if I had to skip through any questions. We just didn't have time tonight. But the next one here comes from Keith again, asking about the garage. Can you let us know the requirements for making a garage an accessory dwelling unit? What is the max square footage for other requirements? So is an accessory dwelling unit different than a livable space?
It is. So an accessory dwelling unit is kind of a weird provision that for ease of simplicity, it lets you put another dwelling unit on the property.
Hmm.
In a lot of neighborhoods in Philadelphia, they've actually just kind of straight outlawed them, and you're just not allowed to put an ADU. And that's what they're called, an ADU, if you want to
Gotcha.
look up some more information on them.
Gotcha.
It's it's a really neat idea to get some more density and create a more urban approach, and our firm is all for it, but unfortunately a lot of the times they're just not allowed. And the second part of that question, which was the max square footage,
Mhm.
it depends on the zoning district. Keith, I apologize, this probably isn't the answer you're looking for, but it depends on the zoning district, and then it depends on the percentage of the primary use. So that can be anywhere from saying it can't be more than 10% of the primary use, to saying it just can't be bigger than the primary use. It depends on the zoning district and where you're talking about in Philadelphia.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up tonight's session. Jesse, I will be sure to send out a follow-up email and CC you, and maybe you can give us some contact information for JLS that
I'd be happy to. That'd be
yeah,
great.
yeah. So jump starters can reach out with any further specific questions. I know that you don't want to become the single source of permit questions for jump starters, but I'm sure people will have projects that need your assistance on in your services. So I'll be sure to make the connection. Yeah.
Glad to help. Thanks everyone for your time.
Yeah, sure. And I'm just gonna close out real quick by sharing my screen again. Um, just another reminder: next week, JUMPinars are continuing on Wednesday evenings, so they're gonna keep on happening at 7 p.m. on Wednesday nights. Same registration and speaker process as always. For the rest of this month, on the 13th, next week, we're speaking with Mike Stanton, who is going to talk about creating your development team and how to, build reliable relationships with people like architects, like we spoke about tonight, or contractors or partners in your development team, or lenders and finances. So we'll be talking about that with Mike next week, and then later this month, another really good topic is about a platform called Direct Subs, and we're going to be speaking about finding contractors for your project. So Direct Subs is sort of like a LinkedIn almost, for connecting developers with local contractors on projects. And we're speaking with the founder of that, CJ Koch, to talk about how Jumpstarters can use it. And you can register for all these events at our website, jumpstartgermantown.com/events. This conversation will be available as a podcast at some point over the next month. I'll produce it and get it into an audio only version, so you can search that and all past episodes by going to Jumpstart Philly Radio on Spotify or podcast or anything like that, and and all the archived episodes are up there. And lastly, and again, I keep on forgetting to update the link on here, but all past JUMPinars are available online at jumpstartgermantown.com/library. If you just go to the homepage, you'll see the media tab there. But yeah, the recording of tonight's Zoom will be up as soon as probably tomorrow or Friday. All right, Jesse, thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time tonight, and I'll hope to speak to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.